believe it'll be successful, but I want to get some ideas and more information about the financing aspect of it
Okay.
because it's something that's different. And I don't know how amenable you are or how much information you can give me to, someone who is new to a particular industry.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we're going to make a point about that today.
All right.
Uh,
Thank you.
it's great. Anybody else?
Hello, I'm Neo Gamo. I'm co-founder and CEO of Neurosonics Medical. We're developing a focused ultrasound device for minimally invasive neurosurgery. I'm also Vice President of Business Development at the Maryland Development Center. So I work closely with Dr. Gil Blankenship and Dr. Deb Hemingway.
Great.
Also, I'm on the keto diet, so I'm just going to watch you bake bread, regular bread. I make almond flour bread.
No problem. Good.
Thank you.
I'm on a half keto. I'm on it half the day and I'm not on it the other half of the day. So it doesn't work out too well. Well, let's jump in. Let's just start and let's talk. So this is going to be a little bit of an interesting session for us. I'm going to try to talk about entrepreneurship a little bit and starting and getting companies funded while we talk about making bread. If anybody knows me in the kitchen, I don't like talking while I'm cooking is the one thing that is kind of my hallmark with my family. And so this is a good challenge for me to figure out if I can pull this off. So just to give you a little bit of my own background, I'll give you my quick background and I'll give you my quick kind of journey with food. So background for me, grew up in Cleveland and Detroit, got into computer science at a young age, went to West Point and became an Army officer, spent 9 years in the Army, and most of that time was running software teams. And then I got out and I started my first company, which was a company that provided software development services to the same community I had just left after working for 9 years, mainly the NSA, the Army, other agencies in the intelligence community. Did that for 5 years, built a really nice business with my partner, and then we sold it essentially. And then we launched a cybersecurity company, raised a lot of money, sold it for a decent amount of money. But there's some really big lessons there that I'll talk about today, kind of fold those in. And it actually goes back to the question we were just talking about, a lot of people say to me, well they look at me and they think, well, you got out of the Army and you started a company. And they perceive that to be a jump that I took, which was a radical jump. And I actually, it wasn't. I was doing things for the same customer base that I had spent 9 years building reputation and credibility and expertise. And actually, my second leap as an entrepreneur, when I went from running a services company to running a cybersecurity product company, that was probably a bigger leap than the first one. And a lot of people wouldn't perceive that to be such. And then after we sold that company, I decided to launch Squadra, which is an early stage investment fund. So, and now we invest in young companies. In terms of my journey with food, food is a big part of my life. I cook a lot. We're here today in my kitchen. And, I started cooking probably when I was 5 years old, making meatballs on Sunday. I lived down the street from my grandmother and, Italian family in Cleveland, Ohio. And every Sunday morning we would go, a lot of times I'd sleep over her house on Saturday night, and then we would make meatballs Sunday morning. And I've been rolling meatballs since I've been 5 years old, and making sauces. I got really serious about food probably when I was living in England, and I started cooking a lot. I started doing a lot of dinner parties, I was actually, and then I got stationed in Italy, and I rediscovered some of my family in Italy. And that's where I really got, took, I think, a deeper appreciation for things. I never really got into bread until COVID, really. I mean, I did a lot of pasta. We have a little special. We may do, I'll show you a couple things with pasta here today too. But I sort of was always scared of yeast. I don't know. And maybe I lacked the patience for it. And before we get into like making a little, we're gonna make something real quickly here. And then I'm going to show you, we're actually going to throw it in the oven quickly so that we can show you what it looks like when it comes out. But actually, let's do this. Let's make a loaf of bread. And we'll show you how this happens. And then while we got about 30 minutes where everything's kind of baking in there, and we'll actually be able to talk a lot more when we do that. So this is a 3-minute class with 57 minutes of me talking. In reality, we have people in the waiting room. I think you just got to sit on there. So we've got, this is going to be like I said, this is pretty much a 3-minute class with 57 minutes of me talking, because this kind of bread is the easiest thing in the world to make. There's a guy called Jim Leahy, and he owns the Sullivan Street Bakery in New York. And about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, they wrote an article on him. You know, bread has been all about kneading and stretching and folding and timing and all these things. And Jim Leahy figured out really and brought to the home baker the fact that if you just mix the ingredients together and let it sit, you don't really have to do anything. So here's the fast way to make a loaf of bread, Jim Leahy style, and we'll talk about things. And it's the simplest thing in the world. We have flour, we have some salt, we have some yeast, we have some water. And we're going to take, and I'm going to tell you why we shouldn't really depend on cups. We'll talk about that in a second, but for the sake of everybody else, I would normally recommend using scales to do things, but I'll tell you what it comes out. We're going to take, literally, we're going to take about 3 cups of flour. And you don't even have to be that precise about it. About 3 cups of flour. We're going to take a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, which is a tiny bit of yeast. We're going to mix it in. We're going to take about 2 teaspoons of salt, maybe less, 1.5 teaspoons, but it's fine. We're going to mix that up with our hands a little bit. We can use our hands for this. So we use 3 cups of flour. I can use this if I want to be a little less messy. And then I've got a 1.5 cups of water. 1.5 cups. It really, and we'll talk about this, depends on the flour. I literally pour this in and I mix it up. And all I'm doing here is mixing it to a point where we get a shaggy dough. This is a little dry. I'll put the rest of the water in. We get a shaggy dough, and I'll use my hands because I'd rather do that. And we get it all in one piece. And we let it sit here. You see what we have here is basically just a shaggy mass of dough. And then we cover it and we let it sit for 12 to 18 hours. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm going to wash it. But there's 12 to 18 hours later, what this turns into is this. And what's really amazing, when we lift this up and we smell it, we get kind of a blast, a little bit of yeast. But what's happened is time, if you look at the bottom, I don't know if we can get a good camera view of this, but can you see all that, those bubbles forming in there? Quarter teaspoon is what I said of yeast. Somebody texted, but yes. What those bubbles, this is all the gluten structures and the yeast working and the air pockets forming. We got a pure person in the waiting room. Okay. So this is now ready, and there's a couple things that we now have to do to this. So now let's assume that we've made this, we've covered it, we've put it in plastic, and I might do this at 9 o'clock at night because I want to make bread the next day, anywhere depending from 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. 12 to 18 hours later, you could even go to 24 hours. What we're then going to do, we're going to take a little bit of flour. We're going to flour a board here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to take this out and we're going to put it on this flour. And what I like to do is just kind of spread it out, and we can get it into a bit of a kind of a rectangle. And then all I'm really doing is starting to form a ball into it. So I kind of roll it in 3, and then I take the corners and just fold them on top of each other. And then flip it over. And then I kind of do my little bread forming. So now I'm just kind of creating a little bit of surface tension and just kind of folding it over on itself. And then spinning it like that. And now what we have is a little kind of boule. So that's it. And I put that on. What I like to do that's really easy is I have this pre-cut parchment paper, which is great. So I'll take a piece of pre-cut parchment paper, put a little flour on it, take that, put it on there. You can have a little more flour on top, and then cover it with a towel. And then let that sit now, because we're now next day, let that sit another 2-3 hours. Now, what I did for the sake of demonstration, meantime, at that point, we preheat an oven, and we'll talk about what we do here in a second. But what I did is I have 2 different, so I did this morning, earlier, a couple hours ago, and I have 2 different loaves here that are in a little bit 2 different states of progress. So, and actually 2 different types of flour. This is the all-purpose flour that you could use. This is a durum. It's a little yellower. It's a hard grain. It's a durum, basically semolina, a similar thing you make pasta with. In Italy, there's a bread called pane altamura, which is phenomenal, and it's made with this flour. But you could see that this is literally what's happened even after a couple hours. That's the original loaf. That's exactly what this thing looked like. It's spread out. It doubled in size, probably 2.5 times its size. This is probably a little bit beyond where I'd normally like it, just because it's late in the day and I made this. This is going on almost 18 hours, 19 hours. This flour just held up a little better. I made it pretty much at the same time, but they're both ready to go in the oven. So that's the whole process. And during COVID, I was making this every night and every morning, turning out that. And then I'll show you what this comes out at once we cook it. So let's get it in the oven so we don't have to wait any longer. Margaret is going to show people what I'm doing here. I have a cast iron pan. I have a cast iron pan that's been preheating at 475. So all I'm going to do, literally just going to take this, pop it in there, and actually I forgot all the score. So just score it, give it a place to do a little more rise. That's it. Put the cover back on. Take 475. Oven top, pan top. We'll do the same thing down here. Got another one. For this. Durum flour. And you don't have to use the parchment, but it makes it so easy. You don't have to screw with it. So these will go for 30 minutes. And then we'll do 25 and then we'll take it out. And then we'll leave it another 10, 15 minutes. And then we will cut them. We'll slice them and I'll show you what they look like. That's making bread. It's the easiest thing in the world. A little hard to talk about it while we're doing it, but I want to talk about a couple of things before we go back to the entrepreneurship stuff. A couple of things that are important. Bread is all about, it's all about hydration. So when if you get into bread making, a lot of people the first thing you learn is don't ever do what I just did, which is to use cups. The reality is I know exactly what those cups weighed because I weighed them and I know how much water. You'll hear people talk about hydration as a percentage. So everything goes off the flour. So in this case, the 3 cups of flour was about 420 grams of flour. We're going for about 75% hydration. So that's working out to about 315 grams of water to get to support 400. So in other words, well, you might think, okay, well, 420 grams of flour, 320 grams of water. That sounds like 4 cups of flour, 3 cups of water, but we did 2-to-1 ratio, not 4-to-3 ratio. That's because a cup of flour weighs a lot less than a cup of water, right? And so it's super important. So that's why most people do everything in scales. Even the salt, I made like what's called a 2% salt bread. So I for 400 grams of flour, I used about 9 grams, a teaspoon and a half is about 9 grams of salt. So it's about 2% salt. Pizza dough, I might go closer to 3% with the salt. So there's another person in there. Wait a and so so that's a big deal. So hydration is a big deal. The other amazing thing about those cast iron Dutch ovens is the reason why we use those is historically when people made bread in their ovens, they got baking stones and they had to put baking stones in the oven with trays of rocks with water, so it created steam, because it's really important. The first phase of the rise of this bread, they need steam. That's why in big commercial bakeries, they have these huge steam ovens. Well, what Jim Leahy realized is if you just put something in a Dutch oven, because that heavy lid doesn't allow steam to escape, you end up with essentially a steam chamber as the bread starts to cook. And so the hydration of the bread produces a ton of steam. It's trapped in this covered Dutch oven, and you have now essentially a steam oven in that little Dutch oven. And then at the end, you take it off, and then the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, we'll take it off and we'll brown it up real nice. and it's cool because essentially this is actually a good theme for startups. I'm a huge fan of like world-class bakeries. I think it's amazing that for the equivalent of like $1 and you don't need a Le Creuset, like those Dutch oven pans are Amazon brand pans that I paid like $50, $40 for instead of a $300 to $400 Le Creuset Dutch oven. Makes no difference, right? And so for a $50 Dutch oven and a bag of flour that costs, you know, $4, I can make almost restaurant, bakery, artisan bakery quality bread at home. And I really feel like that's a lot. It's kind of like the startup level of Class A real estate, you know, like, hey, make it work. Do what you can with very minimal resources, and build something amazing. And so anyway, that's kind of been my journey with bread. We'll come back and talk about it. I wanted to tell you a couple lessons learned there, and then I want to get more into the startup side. You know, something I learned about themes of cooking and baking. I do a lot of big dinner parties. You know, number one, you have to understand the basics of the recipe. So what I just showed you is a very basic bread, right? Flour, water, salt, yeast, in a very basic set of percentages. I know what to do if I want to do things differently. If I want it to go quicker, let more. If I want it to go quicker, I can increase the yeast. If I want to add, if I suddenly start to swap out milk for the water and I start to incorporate egg into it, I end up with a hollow. If I want to add butter and some butter to it, that same and milk and egg, and now I end up with a brioche. If I want to add sugar to that and some pistachio and use a really strong bread flour, now I end up with Italian panettone, you know? And so I know how to maneuver my way around. If I want to make pizza dough, I'm going to use a little bit less water, just in the nature. I'm going to probably make Neapolitan pizza at a 60% hydration, not at this 75% hydration. Interesting thing about pizza, by the way, a lot of people ask me all the time. I have a big pizza oven outside. People will say, Guy, what kind of pizza oven should I get? I've got like 3 different kinds. I got 2 little portable ones. I say, how do you like your pizza? And they say, well, I like it crispy or crunchy. And I say, don't get a pizza oven. The lower the temperature you cook any kind of dough at, the longer time it's in the oven, the longer time the steam is escaping, it's crisping up like toast. So if you want crunchy pizza, instead of cooking it at 900 degrees in my oven here, I'll put it, if I want it crispy and crunchy, I just put it in this oven here on a baking stone or a baking steel, and I cook it at 500 for 7 minutes instead of 900 at 6. Same product, totally different outcome. So we'll look at the bread. By the way, I could show you if we have time. I'll show you a couple things with pasta. Pasta, again, very similar to everything we just did with the bread. No yeast, less water, and with a lot more kneading. So actually, I'll show you this real quick. I made some pasta dough, which I may make tonight. But the pasta dough takes it's a magical thing that occurs after 8 or 9 minutes of pretty intense kneading. And, you know, I let this sit for a couple hours, let the gluten relax, and now I can do all kind of different shapes and things with pasta dough if I want to. So I was showing Margaret before we started here, without even a pasta machine, you know, I can do different things with dough. So this is where my family comes from in the south of Italy. They'll roll this dough out into kind of strands and then just make in different kind of shapes. Like if I want to make um, orecchiette, I could start with pieces of pasta like this and do this. And now I have the orecchiette, if you could see this. Or if I want to make like a cavatelli with ridges on it, I can use this board and I end up with that. So pasta's fun too, similar concepts. If I want to get really fancy, like my aunts in Italy, which this actually gets hard for me, but I can make shapes like this is essentially a bucatini, like it's got a hole in it, and take a little piece of somebody trying to get in the room, or take a cooking wire, or I mean what am I talking about? Clothes hanger. And basically, I really should be on a piece of wood, but we take this pasta. Well, that didn't work very well. That's all right. Or if we want to make like this is called the roll it around this, and you end up with like a kind of like it's called macaroni al ferro. So there's different things you do with pasta. So anyway, maybe we'll do pasta class sometimes if anybody's interested. Let's talk a little bit about lessons learned with companies, okay? And I know we have entrepreneurs on the call, so thanks for now let's get to the real stuff here. Let's get to the real bread. I will leave you with 6 points, 5 points that I have learned about starting companies. Number one, be in a position to dominate something. And usually for me, what that means is that you've got both the capability and to do something in a certain market, but also the domain knowledge, the network, the resources to do it. Things that I have been successful in hindsight were areas where either me or with an immediate set of hires, it doesn't always have to be you, but it's extra hard when the founder's not the expert. It's extra hard. I'm not saying that never happens, but it's extra hard when the founder's not the expert. I get very worried when I look at founders jumping into spaces that they've never been in before, and they're not somehow immediately surrounded by the expertise necessary to dominate that space, unless it's a brand new space, right? Which usually it's not. The second thing is be obsessed not with your product or in most cases for us, the technology, but be obsessed with the value proposition to the customer. We are very aware of this when we take pitches from entrepreneurs. You know, we'll get people come in and they'll spend all this time talking to us about their product, and they don't spend enough time explaining to us how that product is creating value that somebody's willing to pay for. And so this leads to the third point, which is be obsessed with somebody in the room. Be obsessed with the unit economics, we like to call it, the unit economics of the sale and the sales motion. So in other words, I want you as an entrepreneur to explain to me when we get a chance to sit down and talk about your idea, your company, I want you to tell me about why are you making something for $1 that you're able to sell for $2 and it's creating $5 of value for a customer. You know, and that sounds really simple, but we don't hear it enough. We get people who say like, look, we have this thing, it's going to make somebody's one of the, especially when we're selling to the enterprise, a little different with consumers, because consumers buy stuff, whatever, they do irrational things quite a bit. Enterprises do a lot less. So we're talking really for me in the enterprise B2B space. But when people don't understand, when they cannot quantify what something they're asking somebody to pay for is going to either sell them or make them in terms of money, we immediately know that they're going to have a real hard time getting sustainable sales, and that their first sales are not indicative really of anything. So it's super important. Point number 4, have the team, or be prepared to have the team to do it. If I go look back on my own journey, my biggest struggles were probably when I hired what I'll call the right people at the wrong times. The flip side of that, and we're seeing it, is when now as an investor, it's interesting. We have soon to be 8 companies in the Squadra portfolio. And so we can look across and see people doing things amazingly well, people doing things better or poorer. Give you a couple examples, even on some things I just said. The value prop. We have a company called Instant Teams. They provide military spouse remote working labor. So they're competing with outsourced labor providers, and their labor pool is military spouses. The business has taken off once they could quantify the value prop to the customer. Once they could look and say, listen, here's our value prop. Our labor pool is cheaper than what you're currently paying for. It's higher retention here by this percentage. Basically you're getting more high quality, productive, reliable, consistent source of labor, and we could staff in 4 days, and your average person is taking, your other firm's taking 4 weeks or 4 months. They started, boom, really, really transformative. The other thing we've learned is transformative hires are worth their weight in gold. So we have a company, Ship5, that just hired a new, we haven't even announced it yet, but they brought in a new president of the business to join the 3 co-founders. It was a scary thing for us to pay the money, to whether it's through a recruiting firm. Everybody's worried about, this is a big, huge hire. Yes, we know it's going to be awesome, but it's going to be really expensive and it's going to be really complicated. We hired that person. And what's amazing is within a week, that person's already got 4 other rock stars ready to follow behind them. And the business transforms overnight. And I would even argue as a venture fund, we have, and I immediately actually talked to Margaret on my team about this. I don't think we've been transformative early enough in the way that we've worked with entrepreneurs. And as a venture fund, my big learning lesson has been, when we fund companies, we can either fund their sustainment or we could fund their transformation. We could fund their leaps. And the leaps are usually about amazing hires. And we didn't do that enough in our inaugural approach to our first fund, and we're going to do it more moving forward. We've seen it. The last thing is just having the right go-to-market plan and focus. And a lot of people on this call have lived that, I'm sure, but more is not better. I like to call it, I used to call it the Greek diner problem. You could walk into a Greek diner and you could eat anything you want. You want pancakes, you want sushi, you want meatloaf, you want souvlaki, whatever you want, spaghetti meatballs, they got it all. I don't know what kind of kitchen they got there, but you can have it all, and it's distracting. We want to go in, when I was in Italy, the best restaurants you went to at lunch, and they were like, there was no menu. These were the 3 things they had today. This is the way Italian lunch restaurants work. Like, we got these 2 main courses and these 2, what do you want? Which one? And it's simple. There's no stress. Oh, I think I'll take this, or I'll take that. I feel like it's the same way sometimes with go-to-market. Like, more is bad. And then, kind of the last thing really is if I had to encapsulate that into a bunch of kind of guidance, just remember, as an entrepreneur, the thing that I always try to remind myself of is it's not about. So it's not about you, it's about the customer. It's not about the technology, it's about the business problem. It's not about what you've achieved, it's about the plan. The last thing I'll tell you is for people who are involved in growth companies, and maybe they've had their startup for 3 or 4 or 5, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years or whatever it is, and they show up for us and they say, hey, we're now raising $2 million, $3 million, $4 million, $10 million. And they spend 15 minutes telling us what they've achieved to get here. And then they yada yada the next 2 years. And it's like, and oh, by the way, then they just draw a line. They go, because we've done this, we're gonna do this and we're gonna be here. It doesn't work like that. The whole point that I want to hear about is, how are we gonna use money at that point in time to change the way what you're doing now so that we get to we vault to a higher level. It's all about the plan. So nobody, as we say, like we have this, nobody cares what you've done and how you did it. Yes, we do. Of course we care. But the point of it is we care about we get excited about the plan. We want to hear about the plan. We want to understand the plan. So how many minutes we've been in here so far on this, Brett?
About 19.
19. Maybe we'll take a quick peek at it and then we'll see how it's doing in here. I got
And then ask people questions.
it's going to take the cover off and we'll short cut it a little bit, which is never a good thing to do. But let's stop here with talking. And why don't we go to some questions, either on bread or on entrepreneurship. So do we have any questions? And if you do chat, put them in the chat if you want. Margaret will read them.
And people are welcome to go ahead and come off, turn their mic on if they'd like
Yeah.
to ask a question. We're happy to have you do those.
Fire away. Fire away.
Well, this is Kendra again. So I'm in this situation where I told you I'm a lawyer, but I'm into this new field. So what do you suggest for somebody like me who has an established career, but I believe I have a great idea that I believe will benefit other people as well as myself, you know?
Well, look, I think there's always two different ways. We talked, Kendra previously, which shared if you haven't been on the call, has a business idea for women's loungewear, if that's correct. And if I remember correctly, you know, there's definitely, well, first of all, I'm not an expert in clothing. But what I would say is there's two different concepts if you're going to go sort of slowly versus if you're going to go big. If you're going to go big, it's probably not an option at the stage you're at, just because you're not going to find, in other words, you're not going to walk into a venture capital fund and say, I have an idea for women's loungewear. I've never done this. I've not been in the retail industry. I don't have an unfair advantage in this industry, which let me take one step back. When you go for venture capital funding and you go to a firm like Squadra, we look for people who have unfair advantages in their space, which means we actually don't fund a lot of things that end up being super profitable, because the world is filled with experiences of people who have done things despite that, and in many cases, you know, they love to then look at the venture capital industry and say, hey, you missed it, which we miss them all the time. What you have to appreciate is, if we wanted to invest in a retail clothing business, we probably could go out and find 30 entrepreneurs and 30 company decks of people who've spent the last 10 or 15 years grinding in the retail clothing industry and now ready to take their idea to the next level. And so those are the ones that generally we end up focusing on because they're just a higher probability of success. So The other entrepreneur who doesn't have that has to rely on family and friends, has to hustle local connections. Maybe there's a local clothing store. Maybe there's a design. Maybe you've got maybe there's some sort of like, I would think like, okay, maybe you partner up with some young people at the Fashion Institute in New York City who are involved in and who have the capacity to take some designs and turn them in and prototype some things. And maybe you can somehow work with a local clothing entity and get a few pieces made. And maybe you can befriend somebody at a store and get some rack space, and it just slowly starts. I'll tell you, just the flip side of that, a similar story. Again, I don't know if this is inspiring or not, but if anybody's an alcohol drinker, which I'm, if you know the brand Tito's vodka, Tito's, I met Tito a few years ago. Tito is, by the way, sounds like an interesting guy. He's a white guy from Texas. His nickname is Tito. He's like a Texas cowboy. He's a very funny guy. And he doesn't look like a Tito. So Tito, every holiday, had a habit of buying cheap vodka, flavoring it, and giving it to people for gifts. And people went, Tito, this is incredible stuff. And he goes, yeah, but I really actually decided I want to make my own vodka because I actually didn't like the vodka. And I was a chemical engineer. He was working on oil rigs. And he had this idea about making vodka with potatoes. I don't even know what, but he literally went out and built his own bottle of vodka, and he started selling it in local, liquor stores. And people said, wow, and he entered it into contests. And I don't think he ever got really any funding for it. And he built $1 billion business out of it. So hopefully that's just a thought. I mean, you're probably not venture fundable. That's not meant to be an insult to the idea in any way. It's just a reality of our industry. Banks are probably not going to give you money for it. You got to go get individuals to give it to you. So what's the next?
Yeah, I think, and it's sort of like finding the operational partner who is going to help you, whether that's a person who has that industry experience or the student who's going to help you get to that beta test.
Go ahead. Go to the next question.
So next question. What are the key points that you would recommend adding to a pitch deck that would not turn investors off? Or a different way to ask that, what are the things that people put in pitch decks that turn you off immediately?
What turns me off immediately? Big words for me. Machine learning, deep learning, but overdone. Obviously a little bit of it. You better be able to tell me what you're doing algorithmically, that is so transformational. And then even that you are going to be, and that you're $1 billion company before you've even started. For me, I have an opposite. I want to know, and then you give me this big, huge vision, but you give me zero insights on the actual transaction that's you're about to maximize. Let me use one example, and I'm sure the entrepreneur's not on the call, and I won't, say who it is, but I don't like, I'm not trying to trash talk it, but I'll just be real for a second on something. So, really got to know a local entrepreneur, former military like me, doing some stuff with DoD, and it's like building a smart assistant for the battlefield for a very specific function. So I won't go into what it is, but it just disclose, but I found it an interesting idea, and it was like, hey, by the way, we have this technology, which is very similar to me to, what I have is Siri or Alexa, and he's going to, have $1 billion of revenue from DoD. And I say, how are you going to charge it? What are you pricing? Well, we're going to charge, $10,000 a soldier a year. And I'm like, so it doesn't make sense with the soldiers making $30,000 a year as a salary. DoD's not going to spend $10,000 a year for a piece of software that some acquisition person's going to think they could just get for free with their smartphone. So it's the irrationality of the scale. And it's almost like having not just thought through the basics. That's one thing. The second thing is when you, on the team slide, here's an interesting one. I want to know why your team is ready to dominate the problem. I don't frankly that much care about, you know, everything you've ever done unless it ties to what you're trying to achieve. So, you know, one of our founders, I said this, one of my favorite founders we have, but he happens to be a very smart guy and he happens to be a Rhodes Scholar, and that was front and center, you know, on his one of the pitch deck slides. We're preparing for another capital raise, and I said, nobody cares. This is irrelevant to this business, to what we're trying to pitch the investor on. So it's the notion is like, and then the last thing I'll say is, does the deck tell a story? Does it make an argument that an injection of the money you're asking for gets you to the next level? Too many people get on and they go, oh, I'm going to build a pitch deck. And they say, well, I need this slide and 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 this slide, because I read that somewhere in a link. I would say you are making an argument to an investor that says, if you give me $2 million, I will turn your $2 million into $10 million. Make that argument. That's the argument to make. Every slide you think you need is there to support that argument. Write that argument out in an outline before you make your pitch deck. We don't see that enough. So hopefully that's go ahead. I'm going to pull this out, by the way, because I think our bread's ready to.
Okay. Yeah, so keeping the jargon out, telling a story.
Give it two more.
Next question we have is, what are smart questions that entrepreneurs should ask investors before deciding to take their money?
It's a great question. Well, first of all, they should figure out that they are aligned with the investor. You know, we spend a lot of time worrying, you know, trying to make sure that they should say to them, how are we going to measure? First of all, let's take one step back on this question. There's two kinds of investors and there's two kinds of money out there. There is passive money and active money. When you're dealing with a lead investor, I'm using that. I mean, obviously, if you take money from 12 investors to fill out a round of capital, but only one of them is the lead, that's the one I'm focusing on. In reality, you don't have to ask the other people all that much. Let's just stay focused on the lead investor. With the lead investor, you better be aligned on expectations, and you better be aligned on how they expect to communicate with you, and what the rhythm of your relationship is going to be. You know, we have found, and we're evolving, so it's really on us, it's not on the entrepreneurs, but we have found like, hey, we want to actually be different. We want to have weekly contact with our teams. We want to have, you know, quarterly. I think we should probably be having board meetings, shorter board meetings every 6 to 8 weeks with our companies. We write a joint strategic plan with people. We basically write the expectations for the board meetings before we actually give them our check. I don't think entrepreneurs appreciate that the relationships, that those are critical to the relationship. What's next? I'm gonna pull this out.
We're pulling the bread out. Does someone else want to come on for another question to ask verbally? Stephen Babcock, should we take a question from you?
Fair. I mean, I think, thanks, Margaret. Hey, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. I'm interested in how you kind of think about where this is going to zoom out a little bit, but just being an investor right now in a time where we're doing a lot of remote work, and, you know, obviously you're a Baltimore investor and are based here and will continue to be, but how do you kind of think about, I've been hearing from a lot of companies about how fundraising has kind of changed during this time, because you can have more meetings, you can you don't have to travel as much, investors are saying they can go to companies that aren't necessarily based around them in New York and California and that kind of thing, where they typically are. So I mean, how has this time kind of changed that for you? Like, how are you thinking about, and what are you thinking about from now that you really want to carry forward as that anything you learned from this time? I'm especially interested in that. So.
Yeah, great questions. Couple things. Number one, what I will tell you is, I think, first of all, I think we're returning to a lot of physical interaction. I think you need to be prepared for that. And I think you will win. Yes, for this weird amount of time when no one was meeting in person, it was a really nice equal playing field. I actually think a couple things. Number one, getting to know somebody initially, the triage of a new relationship can absolutely be done virtually now. Somebody's trying to get in. The triage of a relationship can be done virtually, which is great. And so whether you're a firm, whether you're a company, you can meet new people virtually. Second of all, the details work can be done virtually. The point I would try to do, though, is I would try to think about the relationship building between investor and entrepreneur as still something to do physically whenever you can. I think it's super important. We can literally look at our own portfolio and say, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we feel it, a difference in intimacy that we have with our founders, the ones that we spent time with physically and the ones that we didn't. Okay. So my core advice there is spend the time, use virtual to get a lot of work done, to do all your triage, to get all the follow-ups done. But really double down physically on the relationships that matter. And I think that the world will return to that. I'm going to cut this, by the way, and we're going to take a look at it on the inside. So this piece of bread here, we're just going to cut it right down. We'll cut it right down the middle here, and we'll show you what. I mean, listen to this.
We did have a question. Can you add herbs to this bread mix? Could you add herbs?
You can do whatever you want. So this is one of them. This is the other. This one's this is that Durham bread. This is a little thicker. I didn't get, by the way, I didn't get a crazy crumb structure here, but this is going to taste fantastic. I mean, it smells unbelievable. This is the Durham. It's a hard flour. It's very, it's yellow. It's got great color. Margaret and I are gonna fry a piece of this here. So any other questions? Here, this is our Durham. This is our regular. Hot.
I'm going to give it a second. Other questions? Jay, Shannon, Larry? Got one in the chat. Do the same rules for gaining capital apply to those providing a service for, say, individuals with special needs in order to build a profit for the company? So the same rules apply for gaining capital for startups that are product focused versus who are offering a service.
It's a different kind of investor. Most service companies don't really require a lot of capital early on. And when human labor is the defining factor, a lot of times, and you have that labor ready, it's actually good candidates for bank financing because banks are willing to loan off that. So Usually not, venture capital funds, we like to invest in software because the marginal cost to reproduce that software is zero. And so you have the ability to scale a business. And it's more capital intensive to get it off the ground, whereas service businesses tend to be a little different. But all the concepts about pitching the plan, not, yourself in a way is definitely a plus.
Jay asks, what is the best time to seek investment in our startup journey? And maybe when do you start building that relationship with investors?
Well, when do you seek it? As late as possible. I think you want to have, the second you take money, you're on a clock. You're on somebody else's clock. And they expect something back. So that's just a reality. You do lose your independence. You're on their clock. They have influence. You lose decisioning. You lose a percentage of your business. So they say, wow, that sounds terrible. Why would I do that? Well, if you need that money, if I told you, you could own 100% of your business and it would take you 20 years and you could build it to be worth $1 million and you'd own the whole thing, that's great. If I told you that if you came to me, I would give you $500,000, I want to buy 30% of your business, but we could build it to a $5 million business in 3 years, but I'm going to be in your face the whole time. Do the math. Most people are better in the latter. That the math is quite easy to understand that. But you also have to determine if that's the experience you want. And so I was listening, just for what it's worth. I posted on LinkedIn today. I posted this interview with this guy, Marco Pierre White, great chef in London. He talks about his journey becoming a Michelin-starred chef in London. You might as well compare this to the journey of a venture-backed startup, because it was not, he lost complete control of himself in his pursuit of this goal. And he did it. And he became famous and he achieved everything he wanted to achieve professionally. And then he gave up his Michelin stars. And he opened a dinky little restaurant and he cooked food that he actually enjoyed cooking for people. And now he has like a pig farm and a this and a that. And he's like, look, I want to, I have a different set of things that I'm driving for, right? If you want to create a gazillion dollars of wealth, this. If you want to work 100 hours a week, 150, this. If you want to enjoy your life over here, there's no right or wrong to any of that. I do a lot of work with vets who transition out of the military. And I try to draw a quadrant when I try to understand people. And I say, 2 questions. Do you want to, you've been in the Army for 20 years and you're getting out. Do you want to trade on your past, or do you want to reinvent in a new career? And that tends to be one level. Number 2, do you want to accelerate or decelerate for the next 20 years? Very big differences of where I start to give you advice. Very big differences depending on what quadrant you pop into. And so a lot of it's the same. By the way, which bread do you like better?
I like the not the durum wheat one.
Oh yeah.
I like the classic. So that was overproofed or potentially overproofed. That's the one I prefer. So it's 5:02. We've really enjoyed having you here, getting to spend some time getting to know Guy and us as investors, and also sharing questions that we have and things you should be thinking about. Guy, do you want to give us a final word, final thought before people head off to the next event?
I guess, let's see. Final word would be, think about all the things. I think that everybody, my final word is actually don't be obsessed. Don't let the social world overwhelm your opinion of what success is or isn't. I think we live in a really interesting time right now where people feel extremely competitive on social media because of social media. They feel like they've, they feel like they've got, they think they know what success looks like, what success doesn't look like. And that's, again, that success is very personal to an individual. Even in terms of like who I admire, I could say this, I try to live this creed myself. Like, I don't necessarily admire, I'm in the venture capital business, I'm in the investing and entrepreneur world, this, that. But if you showed me 5 entrepreneurs and you said, who do you like the best? I wouldn't just immediately say, well, it's that person because they've raised the most money or they've built the biggest company or they're worth the most money, right? I would say, I like that person because I respect that person. I admire that person because they're doing what they want to do, how they want to do it. I always say this, the last point I'll make is I would say this at Squadra. I try to say this to the team. We can, again, I'll go back to my 2x2 matrices. We can essentially, when we make an investment, we always have a plan. And we could look back a year later and say, ask ourselves a couple of very fundamental questions. Did we execute our plan the way we said we were going to do it? And did we win or lose this year? Right? So there's 4 possibilities in that matrix. We could execute our plan the way we wanted to and we could win. We could execute our plan the way we wanted to and we could lose. We could not execute our plan the way we wanted to and get lucky and win. Or we could not execute our plan the way we wanted to and therefore lose and be in a worse place than we were when we started, right? 4 things. And by the way, all 4 things, those always, like, we're always in one of those quadrants. They're not a meeting. I am proud of ourselves. I am proud of the Squadra team when not just the 2 scenarios when we win. I'm proud of the Squadra team when we execute our plan the way we want it to. That's what makes me proud. So I'm fine with us losing if we did our plan, executed our plan the way we wanted to. And by the way, I'll accept winning by luck. I just won't be proud of it. Right? We won't celebrate it. If you can get to that point in your entrepreneurial pursuit, I think you'll be happier. And I think you'll be more resilient. And I think you'll be more likable to yourself and to your friends and to your family, which is what really matters. Right? The rest of this stuff, don't ever let the journey take that away from you, which is hard sometimes. So that's my closing thoughts.
Great.
Thanks,
That's a wrap.
everybody.
Thank you. We did have a few people who said they were interested in pasta. So we can hang out for a few minutes or people are bent down. But thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Who's interested in pasta?
Me, I want to learn to make the homemade pasta.
By the way, my brother is on the call.
My sister is on the call. And people can, if you want to jump into, you can feel free to jump on video or just turn your mics off.
Kendra, you're interested in pasta?
For sure. I've always wanted to do that.
Well,
and the homemade sauce. I've always wanted to know how to do that as well. The sauce from scratch, but I've never had the nerve to try it.
I'll tell you one interesting thing about pasta. And we could talk for people that still want to talk, but I'll show you how to make pasta.
My sister joined.
How you doing, guys? Good job.
We have a location shift. We just shift over there. You good?
So A lot of times pasta is made with egg, but doesn't have to be. All I do, I get a scale, again, $20 kitchen scale. You can use all-purpose flour. So for every 100 grams of flour, we use an egg. Okay. So I'm putting about 200 grams of flour in here. Okay. We'll use a pinch of salt. Two eggs. And this is just all purpose. Now, I use Durham if I'm making spaghetti, but we'll just use this. Always crack the shells in a different bowl. So if you get shell, you see it, like I did here, actually. All right. And then normally I would let this egg come to room temperature, but don't have to. Literally. So I'm going to use the bowl just because it's easier. You'll see people do it on a table, but I'll start it in a bowl. And all we have to do is mix it up. Now, the trick with pasta that I've learned is it looks like it needs more water than it does. So, and the key is it really doesn't. You want to really work it. So maybe it'll need a tiny bit of water. So like I could use, for that 2-egg pasta, I could use maybe another maybe a tablespoon of water if I wanted. I could put a little bit in, but not very much. And all I'm doing is the first stage is just incorporating, putting it all, and then I'm going to start to knead it. I got to clean this counter. I'm obviously doing this in a quick way.
So crumbly compared to what we
Well,
just had.
Well, but it's not, it is, but it's not. So, and I need a scraper. Can you grab me a scraper in there? Other drawer. But the important thing with pasta is we're going to start to knead it. And the kneading technique is we're just stretching it out, turning it once. Right. So I'd use this, and I don't want to. And all we're doing is pushing this down and stretching it, and then turning it long ways and doing the same thing. And I'll do this. This is an egg pasta. The one I made was just flour and water, but it was a different kind of flour. So if I'm using all-purpose flour, I'll always use egg. It just gives it better structure. But this will take 5 minutes of kneading, and then it'll get smooth as a baby's butt. That's the technical.
A metaphor, that's a technical description.
But like this 2-egg pasta, they used to say in Italy, like, it's an egg per person. So this now, if you really like pasta and you eat a lot of it, this is 2 eggs is, you're right, 1 egg is not going to be enough. Like this is going to make, this wouldn't make enough for 2 people, right? But like when I was at my cousin's house in Italy, my aunt would literally say like, well, how many people are we? And then she would measure the eggs. That's how much pasta she would make. And then that would determine how much. So what's crazy, you can't see this, but it started off really shaggy, right? And just working it. And it'll take a good 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And then we just let it sit and then roll it out. That's pasta. Next question.
That's awesome. Next question.
Does that make sense, Kendra?
Yes, it definitely does. Thank you. I think I can do it. And so what machine are you going to use, or are you going to cut it yourself?
Well, I'll probably, with this, I'll use a machine, and I have
Okay.
the
Mhm.
machine to roll it out. Because it's hard to do with the egg with a rolling pin. There's a big, Margaret, get that big.
Oh, what's in there?
No, the big one. There's a big one. So there's a thing I have, it's called a mozzarella. It's a big, huge rolling pin. But anyway, this is pasta. And it actually transforms. Yeah, no, there's a bigger one.
And then how long do you cook it?
Well, if it's fresh, maybe like 2 minutes
Okay.
max.
You put olive oil in there or no?
I don't have any olive oil in here. You can put a little bit in. Yeah,
Okay.
like this is my pasta rolling pin if I want to, let it rest and then roll it out this way. But this is actually pretty good. So it starts to get elastic, but it takes a while.
In real time here.
Real time pasta. We
I
may
love
make
it.
we may make it while you guys are.
Oh, tomorrow.
You and I may have dinner. We have some pasta.
Great. I'm hungry. Arno, you were also making something else during class?
All right, that's it.
Okay.
That's pretty good. I mean, we would just wrap this, let it sit. That's pasta. Put it in some plastic wrap. I think we're good now.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Let it sit for 5 minutes, you said?
I would let this sit for 30 minutes before I roll it
30.
out.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.